The escape pod screamed through the atmosphere like a dying comet, its hull glowing cherry red as atmospheric friction tore at the reinforced plating. Inside, Marcus Chen gripped the emergency harness with white knuckles, watching the alien world rush up to meet him through the cracked viewport. The navigation system had died 3 hours ago, along with most of the ship's crew. Now he was alone, hurtling toward an unknown planet at terminal velocity. The pod struck something solid with bone-jarring force, bounced twice, then skidded through what felt like a forest before finally grinding to a halt against something that rang like metal. Steam hissed from ruptured coolant lines as Marcus fought to stay conscious. His head throbbed, and warm blood trickled down his forehead from where he'd struck the control panel during the crash. Through the haze of pain and smoke, he heard voices approaching. Not human voices, though. They were too high-pitched, with an odd musical quality that his universal translator struggled to process. The emergency hatch had buckled during impact, so Marcus grabbed his survival pack and kicked at the weakened seal until it gave way with a sharp crack. Bright sunlight flooded in, along with the scent of pine needles and something floral he couldn't identify. Marcus stumbled out of the wreckage, nearly falling as his legs shook from adrenaline and shock. That's when he saw them. 3 figures stood at the edge of what appeared to be a training ground, and they definitely weren't human. Each stood roughly 5.5 feet tall, with lithe builds that spoke of speed and agility. What caught his attention immediately were the fox-like ears perched atop their heads, twitching with obvious curiosity, and the bushy tails that swished behind them. Their faces were humanoid but delicate, with large amber eyes and small fangs visible when they spoke in rapid, excited tones. They wore form-fitting uniforms that looked military in nature, deep blue with silver trim and various insignia that Marcus couldn't decipher. Each carried what appeared to be some kind of energy weapon at their hip, though none had drawn them. Yet. The tallest of the 3, a red-haired fox girl with confident posture, stepped forward and said something in their language. When Marcus could only stare blankly, she frowned and tapped a device on her collar. Suddenly, her words came through clearly, though with a slight electronic distortion. "Are you injured, strange one? Your vessel struck our obstacle course with considerable force." Marcus touched his bleeding forehead gingerly. "I think I have a concussion, but nothing's broken. Where am I exactly?" The 3 fox girls exchanged glances before the redhead answered. "You are on the grounds of the Kitsune Military Academy on Vulpine Prime. I am Cadet Commander Yuki Ashford. These are my squad mates, Ray and Mika." She gestured to a black-haired fox girl with serious eyes and a blonde with a more nervous demeanor. "Kitsune Military Academy?" Marcus repeated, trying to process this information. "So you're all soldiers in training?" Yuki's ears flattened slightly against her head. "We are elite combat specialists, not mere soldiers. The Academy trains the finest warriors in the Vulpine Empire." Her tone carried obvious pride, but also a hint of defensiveness. Before Marcus could respond, alarms began wailing across the complex. The fox girls immediately tensed, their hands moving to their weapons. In the distance, Marcus could see figures in different uniforms running toward their position. These newcomers wore white and gold instead of blue and silver. "Academy staff," Ray muttered, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but carried an edge of concern. Yuki's tail bristled as she turned back to Marcus. "Listen carefully, human. The instructors will want to interrogate you, and some of them can be quite harsh with outsiders. The Academy has strict protocols about unauthorized landings." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He was stranded on an alien world with no way to contact his people, and apparently he'd crash-landed in the middle of a military installation. This was going from bad to worse rapidly. The approaching instructors arrived within minutes, led by a stern-looking foxwoman with silver fur and multiple rank insignias. her amber eyes fixed on Marcus with laser-like intensity as she barked orders to the cadets in rapid-fire Vulpine. Even with the translator, Marcus caught only fragments about securing the crash site and maintaining formation. "I am Instructor Colonel Sakura Whitefang," the silver-furred woman announced, switching to the common tongue. "You have violated Academy airspace and damaged training equipment. Explain your presence here immediately." Marcus raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. "My name is Marcus Chen, communications officer aboard the human vessel Endeavor. We were attacked by pirates 3 days ago. Most of the crew was killed and I barely escaped in the emergency pod. I had no control over where I landed." Colonel Whitefang's expression didn't soften. "Human. Yes, we've heard reports of your species from the outer sectors. Primitive but surprisingly resilient. However, that does not excuse your trespass." She gestured to 2 larger foxmen in security uniforms. "You will be detained pending a full investigation of your claims." "Wait," Yuki stepped forward, her posture respectful but determined. "Colonel, with your permission, my squad could take responsibility for monitoring the human. He appears injured and disoriented. Placing him in detention might be unnecessarily harsh given the circumstances." The colonel's ears twitched with what might have been amusement. "And why would I entrust a potential security risk to first-year cadets, Miss Ashford?" Yuki's cheeks flushed slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Because this could serve as an excellent practical exercise in prisoner management and cultural analysis. My squad has consistently ranked in the top 5% for adaptive problem-solving. Supervising the human would provide valuable real-world experience." Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. The fox girl was essentially volunteering to become his jailer, but she was doing it in a way that framed it as an educational opportunity. He had to admit it was cleverly argued. Colonel Whitefang considered this for a long moment, her tail swishing slowly behind her. "Very well, Cadet Commander. Your squad will be responsible for the human's custody and care. You will report to me twice daily with status updates. Any security breach will result in immediate reassignment to waste disposal duties. Is this understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Yuki saluted crisply, followed by Ray and Mika. As the instructors departed with orders to secure the crash site, Marcus found himself alone with his 3 unlikely guardians. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving him feeling exhausted and overwhelmed by the rapid changes in his situation. "Thank you," he said quietly to Yuki. "You didn't have to do that." She shrugged, but her ears perked up slightly. The colonel was right about one thing. This will be good training. Besides, she added with a small smile, "You looked pathetic standing there bleeding and confused. Someone had to help." Ray stepped closer, pulling a medical scanner from her utility belt. "Hold still. I need to assess your injuries properly." The device hummed as she ran it over his head and torso. "Mild concussion, minor lacerations, elevated stress indicators. Nothing life-threatening, but you should rest soon." Mika, who had been quiet during the entire encounter, finally spoke up. "Where will he stay, though? The cadet quarters are gender-segregated, and the guest facilities are for official visitors only." Yuki frowned, clearly not having considered this practical detail. "There's the old maintenance building near the engineering section. It has basic amenities and it's been empty since they upgraded the automated systems." "That sounds like a storage closet," Marcus said weakly. "It's better than the detention cells," Ray pointed out matter-of-factly. "Those don't have windows." As they began walking across the academy grounds, Marcus got his first real look at the institution that would apparently be his temporary home. The architecture was elegant but functional, with sweeping lines that seemed to incorporate natural curves inspired by fox anatomy. The buildings were constructed from a white stone-like material that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, connected by covered walkways lined with flowering plants. Students moved between buildings in small groups, all wearing the same blue and silver uniforms as his escorts. Marcus noticed that while they were all fox-like humanoids, there was considerable variation in their coloring and features. Some had the classic red fur, others were black, brown, silver, or even white. A few had distinctive markings around their eyes or unusual ear shapes. What struck him most was how young they all looked. Despite their military bearing and obvious training, most appeared to be teenagers or young adults. This was essentially a boarding school for anthropomorphic foxes who were learning to become elite soldiers. "How long have you been here?" Marcus asked as they walked. 3 years for me," Yuki replied. "Ray and Mika started the same year. We're in our final semester before graduation and assignment to active duty." "What happens after graduation?" "Depends on our specializations and final rankings," Ray answered. "Top graduates can choose their assignments. Others go where they're needed most." Mika looked nervous as she added, "Some get assigned to frontier worlds where they're still fighting with the Horde." Marcus was about to ask about this horde when they arrived at what would apparently be his temporary quarters. The maintenance building was small, but not as bad as he'd feared. It had a main room with basic furniture, a tiny kitchen alcove, and a separate bathroom. Everything was sized for fox people, which meant it was slightly small for his human frame, but manageable. "The academy provides standard rations to all residents," Yuki explained, opening a wall panel to reveal a food dispenser. "You'll need to register for the system. Ray, can you help him with that?" As Ray began explaining the Academy's various systems and protocols, Marcus found himself studying his unexpected caretakers. Yuki was clearly the leader, confident and decisive, but not arrogant. She seemed to genuinely care about her teammates and had shown remarkable quick thinking in dealing with the colonel. Ray was quieter but observant, with a methodical approach to problems. Mika appeared to be the most empathetic of the group, though also the most anxious. "Why did you really volunteer to watch me?" Marcus asked when Ray finished her technical explanation. The 3 fox girls exchanged glances before Yuki answered. "Honestly, because you're the first human any of us has ever met, and probably the first to set foot on Vulpine Prime. From an academic standpoint, you're fascinating. From a practical standpoint, helping you might look good on our evaluation records. And," Mika added quietly, "you seemed scared and lost. No one should have to face that alone." Marcus felt an unexpected warmth at her words. Despite being stranded on an alien world, surrounded by fox people who could probably kill him without breaking a sweat, he was beginning to feel like he might not be completely alone after all. "So what happens now?" he asked. Yuki consulted a device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a tricorder. "Now you rest and recover. Tomorrow we begin your integration into Academy life while the authorities verify your story. That means learning our customs, understanding the facility layout, and probably answering a lot of questions about human culture and capabilities." "You'll also need proper clothing," Ray noted, looking at his torn and scorched flight suit. "The quartermaster can probably modify standard uniforms to fit your physique." As evening approached, the 3 cadets prepared to return to their own quarters for the night. Marcus realized he would be spending his first night alone on an alien world, in a building designed for fox people, eating food he'd never tried before. The magnitude of his situation was finally sinking in. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked, trying to keep the uncertainty out of his voice. "Of course," Yuki said firmly. "We're responsible for you now. Besides, I suspect this arrangement is going to be more interesting than any of us anticipated." After they left, Marcus sat on the narrow bed and stared out the single window at the alien stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the Endeavor was floating dead in space with most of his friends aboard. He might never see Earth again, never see his family or the woman he'd been planning to propose to when they returned from this mission. But he was alive, and he wasn't alone. 3 Fox girls had taken responsibility for his welfare, and while he didn't fully understand their motivations, he was grateful for their intervention. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as he tried to navigate life in an alien military academy, but for tonight, he was safe. The food dispenser provided something that tasted vaguely like chicken and vegetables, though the seasoning was unlike anything from Earth. As he ate his first meal on Vulpine Prime, Marcus began to plan. He needed to learn everything he could about these people, their technology, and their society. Not just to survive, but to potentially find a way home or at least establish some kind of formal contact between humans and the Vulpine Empire. The bed was smaller than he was used to, and the blankets had an unusual texture, but exhaustion won out over discomfort. As Marcus drifted off to sleep, he wondered what tomorrow would bring in this strange new world of fox girls and military training. Outside his window, the academy continued its nightly routine, with security patrols making their rounds and late-studying cadets burning the midnight oil in preparation for upcoming exams. In the distance, the wreckage of his escape pod sat under guard, a reminder of how dramatically his life had changed in the span of a single day. The last thing Marcus heard before sleep claimed him was the sound of fox-like voices in the distance, speaking in their musical language about subjects he couldn't yet understand. But tomorrow, with the help of his unlikely guardians, he would begin to learn. Marcus woke to the sound of chimes echoing across the academy grounds, followed by the distant noise of hundreds of cadets beginning their morning routines. Sunlight streamed through his window, revealing a view of the training fields where fox girls were already running formation drills. He checked the time on his salvaged wrist computer and discovered it was barely dawn by human standards. A soft knock at his door interrupted his groggy observations. "Marcus? It's Yuki. We brought breakfast and your new uniforms." He opened the door to find all 3 of his guardians waiting outside, looking remarkably alert for such an early hour. Yuki carried a tray of food while Ray held several neatly folded garments. Mika had what appeared to be a tablet computer and was fidgeting with obvious nervousness. "Good morning," Marcus said, stepping aside to let them enter. "I take it you start early here." "First formation is at sunrise," Yuki explained, setting the tray on the small table. "Physical training begins immediately after morning meal. You'll be observing today while we assess your capabilities." The breakfast turned out to be surprisingly palatable, though distinctly alien. There was a protein that tasted like a cross between fish and poultry, some kind of grain porridge with a nutty flavor, and a beverage that provided a caffeine-like boost without the bitter taste of coffee. Marcus found himself eating with more enthusiasm than he'd expected. "The quartermaster worked late to modify these for your dimensions," Ray said, unfolding the uniforms. "Standard cadet issue, but with human measurements. You'll wear the brown and tan colors designated for civilian observers?" Marcus examined the clothing with interest. The fabric felt high-tech, probably containing environmental control systems and possibly basic armor. The cut was more form-fitting than human military uniforms, designed to accommodate tails and allow for the enhanced flexibility that fox people seemed to possess. "Why are you being so helpful?" Marcus asked as he tested the uniform's flexibility. "Yesterday you said this was good training, but you're going far beyond what would be required for simple prisoner management." Mika looked up from her tablet, where she'd been taking notes about his eating habits. "Because you're not really a prisoner, are you? You're a refugee who happened to crash near our school. There's a difference." Yuki nodded approvingly at her squadmate's observation. "Besides, we've been researching humans since yesterday evening. Your species has some fascinating characteristics that could teach us a great deal." "What kind of characteristics?" Marcus asked, suddenly wary. Ray pulled up a holographic display from her wrist device, showing what appeared to be comparative biological data. physical endurance beyond what your apparent strength would suggest, adaptability to diverse environments, problem-solving capabilities that don't always follow logical patterns, but somehow reach effective solutions. Your species also seems remarkably difficult to discourage, Yuki added, with what might have been admiration. Most civilized races would have died out or been conquered long ago with your technological limitations, but humans keep expanding and thriving despite incredible obstacles. Marcus felt a surge of pride at her words, though he tried not to let it show. We're stubborn, I'll give you that. After changing into his new uniform, which fit better than he'd hoped, Marcus accompanied the 3 cadets to their first class of the day. The Academy's educational system turned out to be more comprehensive than he'd expected, covering everything from advanced physics to xenobiology to strategic analysis. Their first stop was advanced combat theory, taught by a grizzled foxman with multiple scars and an intimidating presence. Colonel Ironfang immediately noticed Marcus's presence and decided to use him as a teaching opportunity. "Class, we have a human observer today," the instructor announced. "This presents an excellent chance to discuss adaptive tactics when facing unknown opponents. What can you tell me about human combat capabilities based on observation alone?" A silver-furred cadet raised her hand. "Limited physical speed and strength compared to most known species. No natural weapons like claws or fangs. Probably relies heavily on tools and ranged weapons." "Adequate assessment." Colonel Ironfang nodded. "What else?" "Bipedal locomotion suggests poor balance and agility," another student offered. Marcus found himself bristling at these casual dismissals of human capabilities, but Yuki caught his eye and shook her head slightly. This was apparently not the time to speak up. "Interesting theories," the colonel said. "However, you're making assumptions based on limited data. Human, step forward, please." Marcus approached the front of the classroom, acutely aware of being studied by 36 pairs of amber eyes. Colonel Ironfang pulled up a holographic display showing comparative species data. Humans are indeed physically inferior to most known spacefaring races in terms of raw strength, speed, and agility. However, they excel in 2 critical areas that many of you overlooked. He manipulated the display to highlight specific biological systems: endurance and adaptability. The display showed comparative data on persistence hunting, environmental tolerance, and healing rates. Marcus was surprised to see that humans apparently outperformed most known species in these categories by significant margins. A human soldier can march for days with minimal rest, fight effectively in environments that would incapacitate others, and recover from injuries that would permanently disable many aliens. More importantly, they adapt their tactics continuously during combat, rather than relying on predetermined strategies. A student near the back raised her hand. "But surely those advantages are minimal against superior technology and training." Colonel Ironfang's scarred face showed what might have been amusement. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to tactical defeats, Cadet Morrison. Underestimating an opponent based on apparent weaknesses while ignoring their strengths is a classic military error." The lesson continued with increasingly detailed analysis of human warfare patterns, drawing from historical data that Marcus found both fascinating and somewhat concerning. The Vulpine Empire had been studying human expansion patterns and military conflicts for some time, apparently viewing his species as a potential future threat or ally. After class, as they walked to their next destination, Mika voiced what they were all thinking. "We're being evaluated too, aren't we? This isn't just about helping a stranded alien. The Academy wants to learn about humans through direct observation." Yuki nodded grimly. "Which means we need to be very careful about what information we share and how we conduct ourselves. Our handling of this situation could affect humanity's future relationship with the Empire." Their next stop was the Academy's Technological Development Lab, where students learn to maintain and modify advanced equipment. The instructor, Dr. Silverwhisker, was an elderly foxwoman with an obvious passion for engineering and an immediately apparent interest in Marcus's presence. "Fascinating," she muttered, studying him through magnifying lenses. "Your cranial capacity suggests significant processing power, but the neural structure must be quite different from ours. Tell me, how do humans approach complex problem solving? Do you rely primarily on logical analysis or intuitive leaps?" "Both," Marcus answered carefully. "Usually we try logical analysis first, but when that doesn't work, we make educated guesses and see what happens." Dr. Silverwhisker's ears perked up with obvious excitement. "Empirical trial-and-error methodology. How wonderfully primitive yet effective. Would you be willing to participate in some basic aptitude tests? Nothing invasive, simply some mechanical puzzles to observe your problem-solving approach." The next 2 hours turned into an impromptu research session as Marcus worked through increasingly complex three-dimensional puzzles while the Foxgirl students observed and took notes. What surprised everyone, including Marcus himself, was how differently he approached the problems compared to the Vulpine cadets. Where the Foxgirls used systematic analysis and elegant mathematical solutions, Marcus often found success through unorthodox approaches that violated established principles but somehow worked anyway. When presented with a gravity-defying structure that required precise balance calculations, he simply started adding and removing components until it stabilized, completely ignoring the underlying physics. "Remarkable," Dr. Silverwhisker declared. "You achieved the correct solution through pure intuition, despite having no understanding of the mathematical principles involved. This suggests human neural processing includes significant unconscious pattern recognition capabilities." During the lunch break, Marcus found himself sitting with Yuki's squad in the cadet dining facility, surrounded by curious stares and barely audible conversations about the strange alien in their midst. The food was better than his emergency rations, but strange enough to require careful tasting of each component. "You're adapting to our environment faster than anyone expected," Ray observed, watching him navigate the complex utensils designed for claw-tipped fingers. "Most aliens require weeks to adjust to our food and customs." "Maybe that's the human adaptability everyone keeps talking about," Marcus suggested. "We're used to dealing with unfamiliar situations." Mika looked up from her ever-present note-taking tablet. "Can I ask you something personal? What was your life like before the crash? I mean, what do humans do when you're not fighting or exploring?" Marcus thought about his life aboard the Endeavor, his job monitoring communications between distant human colonies, his apartment on Luna Station with its view of Earth. It seemed like another universe now, impossibly distant and peaceful. "Pretty ordinary, really. I worked on a survey ship, cataloging new star systems and establishing communication relays. When we weren't working, we played games, watched entertainment broadcasts, spent time with friends and family, a lot like what you probably do here when you're not training." "Do you have family waiting for you?" Mika asked quietly. The question hit harder than Marcus had expected. "My parents, a sister, and a girlfriend named Sarah who's probably wondering why we haven't sent any messages for the past week." He paused, fighting down the sudden wave of homesickness. "They don't even know I'm alive." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table as the three Fox girls processed this information. Finally, Yuki spoke up with obvious determination in her voice. "Then we need to find a way to get you home, or at least get a message to your people." Marcus stared at her in surprise. "You'd help me do that?" "Even though it might mean losing a valuable research subject?" "You're not a research subject," Yuki said firmly. "You're a person who's been separated from his family through circumstances beyond his control. That's not something to be exploited." Ray and Mika nodded agreement, though Ray looked thoughtful. "It won't be easy. The Academy doesn't have deep space communication equipment capable of reaching human territory. We'd need access to Imperial naval facilities, which requires special authorization. One problem at a time, Yuki decided. First, we help Marcus learn enough about our society to function independently. Then we work on getting him proper legal status. After that, we can worry about communication with human space. The afternoon brought physical training, which Marcus had been dreading based on the morning's casual dismissal of human athletic capabilities. However, he discovered that the Academy's training regimen was designed to push students to their limits rather than compare them to arbitrary standards. The obstacle course was clearly designed for fox people, with narrow ledges, tight squeezes, and sections requiring significant climbing ability. Marcus couldn't match the natural agility of his companions, but his different physiology allowed him to solve certain challenges through alternative approaches. Where the fox girls scrambled up vertical surfaces using their claws, Marcus found ways to brace himself between walls or used his longer reach to span gaps they had to leap across. His greater mass and leverage allowed him to move obstacles they had to work around. Most importantly, his endurance let him maintain a steady pace, while others had to rest between intensive sections. "Interesting tactical adaptations," commented the physical training instructor, Major Swiftclaw, as she observed Marcus complete the course. "Your time was mediocre, but your approach was entirely novel. You essentially redesigned the exercise to match your capabilities rather than attempting to emulate our methods." After training, as they walked back toward Marcus's quarters, Yuki brought up something that had been bothering her all day. The questions Dr. Silverwhisker was asking about human problem-solving approaches, and Colonel Ironfang's lecture about human military capabilities. The Academy is clearly preparing for something involving your species. Marcus had reached the same conclusion. The question is whether they see humans as a potential threat to be countered or a potential ally to be understood. Maybe both, Ray suggested. From what I've learned about galactic politics, the Vulpine Empire is facing increasing pressure from something called the Horde. If humans are as adaptable and persistent as the data suggests, we might be seen as valuable allies in that conflict. "What exactly is the Horde?" Marcus asked. The three Fox girls exchanged uncomfortable glances before Mika answered. "A collective of machine intelligences that consume organic civilizations. They've been expanding through the Outer Rim for the past 50 years, assimilating or destroying everything in their path. The Empire has been the primary military force resisting them." Marcus felt a chill as he processed this information. If humanity was expanding into space at the same time as this horde was consuming civilizations, first contact between humans and this machine collective was probably inevitable. The Fox people might be hoping that human adaptability could provide new strategies for fighting an enemy that had already adapted to all conventional military approaches. That evening, after his guardians had returned to their own quarters, Marcus sat in his small room thinking about everything he'd learned during his first full day at the Academy. He was beginning to understand that his presence here was about much more than simple curiosity or humanitarian concern. The Vulpine Empire was facing an existential threat from a technologically superior enemy, and they were desperately seeking any advantage that might help them survive. Humans represented an unknown factor, a species whose unconventional approaches might provide solutions that traditional military thinking couldn't achieve. But that also meant his every action was being observed and analyzed for insights into human capabilities and psychology. His three guardians might genuinely care about his welfare, but they were also inadvertently serving as intelligence gatherers for their government. The realization didn't make him angry exactly. If Earth was truly facing the same threat from this horde, then cooperation between humans and the Vulpine Empire could benefit both species. But it did mean he needed to be very careful about what information he revealed and how he conducted himself. As he prepared for sleep, Marcus made a decision. he would cooperate fully with the Academy's research efforts, but he would also learn everything he could about their technology, their society, and their military situation. If he was going to serve as humanity's informal ambassador to the Fox people, he needed to understand exactly what kind of universe his species was expanding into. Outside his window, the Academy continued its nightly routine, but now Marcus understood the urgency that drove their constant training. These weren't just students learning military skills for theoretical conflicts. They were preparing to fight for the survival of their civilization against an enemy that had already destroyed countless worlds. Tomorrow would bring new lessons and new challenges as he continued to navigate life among the Fox girls. But tonight, for the first time since the crash, Marcus felt like he had a purpose beyond simple survival. He might be stranded on an alien world, but he was also uniquely positioned to help forge an alliance that could benefit both humans and Vulpines in the struggles ahead. 2 weeks had passed since Marcus's crash landing, and his integration into Academy life had progressed far beyond anyone's initial expectations. What had begun as a simple custody arrangement had evolved into something approaching genuine friendship with his 3 guardians, though the underlying political implications of his presence had only grown more complex. The morning began differently than usual, with Colonel Whitefang herself arriving at his quarters, accompanied by a foxwoman Marcus had never seen before. This newcomer wore the deep purple uniform of Imperial Intelligence, and her silver eyes studied Marcus with the intensity of a predator evaluating potential prey. "Marcus Chen," Colonel Whitefang began formally. "This is Agent Vixen Moonshadow from Imperial Strategic Analysis. She has some questions regarding your species' technological capabilities and territorial holdings." Agent Moonshadow stepped forward, her movements fluid and precise. "I've been studying the reports from your integration period with great interest, Mr. Chen. Your problem-solving approaches and adaptive capabilities are quite remarkable. However, I need to discuss matters of galactic security that go beyond academic curiosity." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. This was the conversation he'd been expecting since his first day, when it became clear that the Academy's interest in him was more than purely educational. "What kind of matters?" "The Horde has accelerated their expansion schedule," Agent Moonshadow replied bluntly. "Our intelligence indicates they've begun targeting systems along what your people call the Outer Rim. Based on human expansion patterns we've observed, contact between your species and the Horde is no longer a question of if, but when." She activated a holographic display showing a 3-dimensional star map with various colored zones marking territorial boundaries. Marcus could see human space represented as a small cluster of green dots, while vast red areas indicated Horde-controlled regions. The gap between them was shrinking rapidly. "Conservative estimates suggest first contact will occur within the next 18 months, Agent Moonshadow continued. "When that happens, your species will face the same choice every other civilization has encountered: submit to assimilation or face annihilation. Unless," Colonel Whitefang added, "humanity proves capable of providing what no other race has managed, a tactical approach the Horde hasn't already adapted to counter." Marcus studied the map, noting the scattered yellow zones that represented Imperial territory. The Vulpine Empire was clearly under pressure from multiple directions, with Horde forces pushing closer to their core worlds every year. "You want to use humans as test subjects for new anti-Horde strategies," he said finally. Agent Moonshadow nodded without any apparent shame. "Essentially, yes, but not in the way you're thinking. We don't want to sacrifice human lives in futile experiments. Rather, we want to understand how human thinking approaches problems that have stymied our best military minds." Before Marcus could respond, rapid footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, followed by urgent knocking. Yuki's voice called through the door. "Marcus, emergency assembly has been called. All personnel to report immediately." Colonel Whitefang frowned and activated her communicator. The response came back in rapid vulpine that made both women's ears flatten against their heads. Agent Moonshadow's expression shifted from professional neutrality to genuine concern. "What is it?" Marcus asked. "Horde scout ships have been detected in the system," Colonel Whitefang replied grimly. "This is no longer a theoretical discussion." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as the Academy shifted into full combat readiness. Students moved with practiced efficiency to secure equipment and prepare defensive positions, while instructors coordinated with Imperial naval forces for potential evacuation procedures. Marcus found himself in the unprecedented position of being both protected asset and potential intelligence source. While the Fox girls prepared for possible combat, Agent Moonshadow grilled him about human defensive technologies, fleet compositions, and military doctrines. "I'm a communications officer," Marcus protested for the fourth time. "I don't know classified military information about ship designs or weapon systems." "You don't need to know specifics," Agent Moonshadow insisted. "I want to understand how humans think about defense. When your people are outnumbered and outgunned, what do they typically do?" Marcus considered this carefully. It was a fair question and one that didn't require revealing sensitive information. "We look for force multipliers, ways to use the environment, superior positioning, or unconventional tactics to level the playing field. If we can't win through direct confrontation, we try to change the rules of engagement." Elaborate. "Well, for example, if an enemy has superior ships but depends on complex logistics, we might target their supply lines instead of their fleets. Or if they have better technology but limited manufacturing, we focus on attrition warfare to exhaust their resources." Agent Moonshadow's ears perked up with obvious interest. "The Horde has never faced sustained attrition campaigns. Their machine efficiency means they typically overwhelm opponents through rapid, concentrated attacks." Their conversation was interrupted by Yuki, Ray, and Mika arriving in full combat gear. The three Fox girls looked grimly professional in their battle uniforms, with weapons and equipment that Marcus hadn't seen during normal training exercises. "Marcus," Yuki said urgently, "we've been assigned to your protection detail during the emergency. If evacuation becomes necessary, you're coming with our squad." "What's the current situation?" Marcus asked. Ray consulted her tactical display. 3 Horde scout vessels detected at the system's edge. They appear to be conducting reconnaissance rather than preparing for immediate attack, but Imperial Fleet Command is taking no chances. Scout ships usually precede major invasions by 72 to 96 hours, Mika added nervously. "If they're here now, the main force probably isn't far behind." Agent Moonshadow stood abruptly. "This changes everything. Mr. Chen, I'm going to make you an offer that could benefit both our species significantly." She activated her communicator and spoke rapidly in Vulpine to someone on the other end. After a brief, intense conversation, she turned back to Marcus with an expression of grim determination. "Imperial Command has authorized me to offer you provisional citizenship in the Vulpine Empire, with full access to our communications networks. In exchange, you'll serve as a liaison between our forces and any human ships that might respond to the situation here." Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was far beyond anything he'd been prepared for when he'd climbed into that escape pod. "You want me to speak for humanity in potential first contact with your government?" "Not speak for humanity," Agent Moonshadow clarified. "Speak to humanity. Help us establish communication protocols and coordinate joint responses if the situation requires it. And if I refuse, then you'll be evacuated to a safe world where you can live comfortably while we handle the Horde crisis alone. But humanity will face their first contact with the Horde without any knowledge of what they're up against or any possibility of Allied support." Yuki stepped forward, her expression intense. "Marcus, you don't have to decide right now, but you should know that my squad supports whatever choice you make. You're not alone in this." The sincerity in her voice, echoed by nods from Ray and Mika, gave Marcus the strength to make his decision. These 3 Fox girls had protected him, taught him, and accepted him when they had no obligation to do so. More importantly, they represented the best qualities of their species: courage, loyalty, and a willingness to help others despite personal risk. "I'll do it," Marcus said firmly. "But I have conditions." Agent Moonshadow raised an eyebrow. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate." "Actually, I think I am," Marcus replied with more confidence than he felt. "You need human perspectives on fighting the Horde, and I'm the only human available. That gives me some leverage." "What do you want?" "First, Yuki, Ray, and Mika remain as my primary liaisons and protection detail. They're the ones I trust, and they understand both cultures now. Second, any communications with human space include guarantees that no military information will be shared without explicit approval from both governments. Third, if we survive this, I want help establishing formal diplomatic relations between our species." Agent Moonshadow considered these terms while alarms continued to sound across the academy. Finally, she nodded. "Acceptable. You'll be granted emergency diplomatic status with provisional imperial citizenship. Your guardians will be officially designated as cultural liaison specialists with appropriate security clearances." Over the next several hours, Marcus found himself thrust into a crash course in interstellar diplomacy and military coordination. The Academy's communications center became a hub of activity as Imperial forces worked to track the Horde scouts and prepare for potential invasion. The breakthrough came when Marcus suggested using human communication protocols to contact any vessels in the region. The Imperial Navy had been attempting standard interspecies hailing frequencies, but Marcus pointed out that human ships would be monitoring emergency channels using specific modulation patterns. "Human ships always monitor distress frequencies," Marcus explained, as technicians adjusted their equipment. "If there are any vessels in the area, they'll respond to a properly formatted emergency broadcast." The response came faster than anyone expected. Within 2 hours of beginning the modified broadcasts, they received a reply from the human merchant vessel Prosperity. Currently 3 days away at maximum acceleration, Captain Sarah Morrison was startled to learn about the Horde presence and extremely surprised to discover that her communications officer, Marcus Chen, was somehow alive and serving as a diplomatic contact. "Marcus? Is that really you?" Captain Morrison's voice came through clearly despite the distance. "The Endeavor was reported lost with all hands a month ago. How did you end up working with Fox people?" "It's a long story, Captain. Right now we need to focus on the Horde scouts in this system. The Vulpine Empire has been fighting them for decades, and they have intelligence about Horde capabilities that could be crucial for human defense. The next phase of negotiations required delicate handling of first contact protocols while dealing with an immediate military threat." Captain Morrison was understandably cautious about accepting alien allies, but the presence of Horde forces provided compelling motivation to cooperate. Marcus found himself serving as translator not just for language, but for cultural concepts and military thinking. When Imperial strategists proposed joint patrol patterns, he had to explain why human captains preferred autonomous operation with coordinated objectives rather than integrated command structures. "Humans don't like being told exactly what to do by people they don't know," Marcus explained to Agent Moonshadow. "Give Captain Morrison a set of objectives and let her figure out how to achieve them. She'll be much more effective that way." Meanwhile, Yuki, Ray, and Mika proved invaluable in helping Marcus navigate Imperial military protocols while maintaining his effectiveness as a cultural bridge. Their understanding of both human and Vulpine perspectives allowed them to suggest compromises when negotiations threatened to stall. The crisis reached its climax when long-range sensors detected the main Horde force approaching the system. 12 major vessels with sufficient firepower to overwhelm the local Imperial garrison. Captain Morrison's ship would arrive just hours before the Horde fleet, providing minimal additional firepower but potentially valuable intelligence about human defensive capabilities. The Horde will analyze our response patterns and adapt accordingly, Agent Moonshadow warned during the final strategy session. We need to do something they haven't seen before. Marcus studied the tactical displays, thinking about everything he'd learned about both species' military approaches. The Vulpines favored elegant, coordinated strategies that maximized their technological advantages. Humans, according to his own experience, preferred adaptability and unconventional solutions when faced with superior opposition. What if we don't try to beat them? Marcus suggested. What if we just try to confuse them? The room fell silent as everyone considered this apparently defeatist strategy. Finally, Colonel Whitefang spoke up. Explain. The Horde adapts to patterns, right? They study how civilizations fight and develop counters. But what if there is no pattern to adapt to? What if we deliberately use inconsistent, seemingly irrational tactics that don't follow any coherent strategy? Agent Moonshadow's eyes lit up with understanding. Random responses that can't be predicted because they're not based on logical optimization. Exactly. Some ships retreat when logic says they should advance. Others advance when retreat makes more sense. Some follow standard Imperial doctrine while others try completely random approaches. The Horde won't be able to adapt because there's nothing consistent to adapt to. The strategy that emerged from this discussion was unlike anything in Imperial military doctrine. Instead of coordinated fleet actions, individual ships and squadrons would operate according to randomly generated tactical parameters, changing their approach every few minutes according to predetermined random number sequences. When the Horde arrived, they encountered something unprecedented, a defense that made no logical sense. Imperial ships would begin standard attack formations, then suddenly break off to attempt completely different maneuvers. Human vessels used entirely different tactical approaches that followed no pattern the Horde had ever encountered. The machine intelligence directing the Horde forces struggled to analyze and counter tactics that violated all known principles of military efficiency. Every time their adaptive algorithms began to predict enemy behavior, the defending forces would switch to entirely different approaches that rendered those predictions useless. The battle itself was chaotic and frightening, with weapons fire lighting up space around the planet while Marcus and his guardians monitored communications from the Academy's command center. But gradually, it became clear that the strategy was working. Horde forces, designed to overwhelm opposition through superior adaptation, found themselves unable to gain decisive advantages against defenders who refused to follow logical patterns. After 18 hours of confused fighting, the Horde fleet withdrew to regroup and analyze what they had encountered. For the first time in Imperial records, a Horde invasion force had retreated without achieving their objectives. In the aftermath, as both species' vessels regrouped and began damage assessments, Marcus found himself at the center of historic first contact between humanity and the Vulpine Empire. What had begun as a single human crashing into a military academy had evolved into a new alliance that might prove crucial for both species' survival. "You did it," Yuki said quietly, as they watched the combined human and Imperial fleets establishing joint patrol patterns. "You found a way for our peoples to work together against the Horde." Marcus shook his head. "We all did it. This only worked because we learned to understand each other well enough to combine our different approaches effectively." Agent Moonshadow approached with official documentation that would establish formal diplomatic relations between the two governments. "Mr. Chen, on behalf of the Vulpine Empire, I'm authorized to offer you permanent diplomatic status with full privileges. Your insights may have saved not just this world, but potentially both our civilizations. As Marcus accepted the documents that would make him humanity's first official ambassador to an alien government, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that desperate escape from the Endeavor. He'd crashed into a Fox Girl combat school as a lost refugee, but he was emerging as a bridge between two species that needed each other to survive. The future remained uncertain, with the Horde still threatening both human and imperial space. But for the first time since the crisis began, that future included the possibility of allied worlds working together against common threats. And at the center of that alliance were three Fox girls who had chosen to care for a stranded alien, turning a chance encounter into the foundation of interstellar cooperation. Outside the Academy, combined human and Imperial patrol ships continued their vigilant watch against potential Horde incursions. Inside, Marcus Chen began composing his first official diplomatic report to Earth, knowing that the words he chose would help shape humanity's relationship with their new allies for generations to come.